Let me be completely direct with you from the outset, because what occurred at 2:14 a.m. Israel time on April 17, 2026, represents a threshold crossing that fundamentally alters the strategic equation in the Middle East. Everyone has been waiting for Iran's retaliation. Everyone has been analyzing missile trajectories and interception rates. Everyone has been debating whether Iran would target military installations or symbolic sites. But what Iran actually hit, and what the Israeli government has been deliberately vague about for the past 48 hours, is not a symbolic target. It is not a military airbase. What Iran hit was the Dimona nuclear facility in the Negev desert, and the implications of that strike are so severe that multiple governments are currently engaged in urgent consultations to prevent this situation from spiraling into regional nuclear crisis. I'm looking at three separate sources of information that have emerged since 2:14 a.m. on April 17th. Seismic data from the United States Geological Survey showing a 3.1 magnitude event at precisely 2:14:22 a.m. at coordinates that correspond to the Dimona complex. Satellite imagery analysis from ImageSat International showing new impact craters and structural damage to above-ground facilities at Dimona, and a leaked internal assessment from the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission that was circulated to senior government officials at 9:30 a.m. on April 17th, describing the damage as significant and recommending immediate international consultation on containment protocols. In the next 22 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what was hit at Dimona, what weapon system Iran used to penetrate Israeli air defenses, why this strike represents the first direct attack on an Israeli nuclear facility in the country's history, and why the global response over the next 72 hours will determine whether we are looking at a contained crisis or the prelude to something far more catastrophic. This is the Daily Brief. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what I am about to explain is based on technical analysis and intelligence assessments that are not being reported in mainstream media, and by the end of this briefing, you will understand why governments around the world are treating this situation with extreme urgency. Let's start with what Dimona actually is, because understanding why this strike matters requires understanding what was targeted. The Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, commonly referred to as Dimona, is Israel's primary nuclear facility. It is located approximately 55 kilometers southeast of Beersheba in the Negev desert. The facility was constructed between 1958 and 1964 with French technical assistance. It houses a research reactor that is estimated to have produced weapons-grade plutonium sufficient for Israel's nuclear weapons arsenal, which outside analysts assess at between 80 and 400 warheads, though Israel has never officially confirmed or denied possession of nuclear weapons. The facility consists of multiple above-ground structures and at least one underground reprocessing complex. The reactor itself is housed in a distinctive dome structure that is visible in satellite imagery. Surrounding the reactor are research laboratories, administrative buildings, spent fuel storage areas, and extensive security infrastructure. The entire site is protected by multiple layers of air defense systems, including Iron Dome batteries, David's Sling interceptors, and Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric missiles specifically designed to intercept ballistic threats. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency's most recent public assessment, which is from 2019 because Israel does not permit regular IAEA inspections of Dimona, the facility is operationally active and continues to conduct research related to nuclear technology. What the IAEA does not state, but what is understood by every intelligence service in the world, is that Dimona is the beating heart of Israel's nuclear deterrent. It is the physical manifestation of the Samson option, Israel's doctrine of last resort nuclear retaliation in the event of existential threat. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing that what I just described is not a symbolic target or a military airbase, but the single most strategically sensitive site in the entire state of Israel. And now let's talk about what happened at 2:14 a.m. and how Iran managed to hit a facility that is supposed to be protected by the most advanced air defense network in the world. Announcement number 1, the weapon system used. According to analysis by multiple defense research organizations, the strike on Dimona was conducted using Iran's K-Bar-Shikan medium-range ballistic missile. This missile was first publicly revealed by Iran in February 2022. It has an estimated range of 1,250 kilometers, sufficient to reach Israel from launch sites in western Iran. It carries a warhead estimated at 650 kilograms. And critically, it uses a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, which means that during the terminal phase of flight, as the missile descends toward its target, it can adjust its trajectory to evade interception attempts. The specific capability that allowed the K-Bar-Shikan to penetrate Israeli air defenses is what military analysts call hypersonic glide maneuvering. As the missile re-enters the atmosphere, it does not follow a predictable ballistic arc. Instead, it executes lateral maneuvers at speeds exceeding Mach 8. Current generation missile defense systems, including Israel's Arrow 3, are optimized to intercept ballistic targets following predictable trajectories. When a target begins maneuvering at hypersonic speed, the intercept calculation becomes exponentially more difficult because the defender has only seconds to react and the margin for error is negligible. According to reporting by the Times of Israel and confirmed by statements from unnamed Israeli defense officials, the Arrow 3 battery protecting the Dimona area did launch interceptors in response to the incoming missile. Israeli Air Defense Command tracked the K-bar Shikan from launch. Early warning radars detected it approximately 4 minutes and 30 seconds before impact. Two Arrow 3 interceptors were fired. Both missed. The missile completed its terminal maneuvers and impacted the Dimona complex at 2:14:22 a.m. with an accuracy that multiple analysts have described as remarkable given the range and the complexity of the trajectory. Let me be very specific about what this means strategically. For decades, Israel's nuclear deterrent has been credible precisely because it was believed to be invulnerable. Dimona was protected by geography, by secrecy, and by the assumption that any adversary attempting to strike it would face insurmountable air defense barriers. That assumption has now been invalidated. Iran has demonstrated that it possesses a missile system capable of reaching Dimona and a guidance technology capable of defeating Israeli interception attempts. That is not a theoretical capability. That is a proven capability demonstrated under combat conditions. Received. That is announcement number 1. Iran used a hypersonic maneuvering ballistic missile to strike the Dimona nuclear facility, and Israeli air defenses failed to intercept it despite advance warning and multiple intercept attempts. Now let's talk about what was actually hit and why the Israeli government has been extremely careful about what information it releases publicly. Announcement number 2, the damage assessment. In the 48 hours since the strike, the Israeli government has issued 3 brief statements. The first statement, released at 5:47 a.m. on April 17th by the IDF spokesperson's unit, confirmed that a missile launched from Iran impacted in the southern Negev region and that there were no casualties. The second statement, released at 11:23 a.m. on April 17th by the Prime Minister's office, stated that the security situation is being managed and that all relevant agencies are coordinating response measures. The third statement, released at 3:15 p.m. on April 18th by the Ministry of Environmental Protection, stated that environmental monitoring teams are conducting assessments at an undisclosed location in the Negev, and that preliminary findings indicate no radiological contamination above background levels. What these statements do not say is as important as what they do say. They do not specify what was hit. They do not describe the extent of damage. They do not confirm or deny that Dimona was the target, and they do not address whether the facility's operational status has been affected. That level of opacity is deliberate. Israel does not confirm details about Dimona operations under any circumstances. But the opacity also creates information vacuum, and in that vacuum, analysis from external sources becomes critical. According to satellite imagery analysis published by ImageSat International on April 18th, the K-bar-Shikan missile impacted approximately 180 meters northwest of the main reactor dome at Dimona. The impact created a crater estimated at 12 meters in diameter and caused visible structural damage to at least 2 above-ground buildings in the administrative section of the complex. One of those buildings, according to architectural analysis cross-referenced with historical imagery, is believed to house control systems for the reactor's cooling and monitoring infrastructure. Now stay with me because this is where the technical details become critically important for understanding the strategic implications. The missile did not hit the reactor dome itself. If it had, we would be dealing with a completely different crisis. A direct hit on the reactor could have caused a containment breach, potential release of radioactive materials, and a regional environmental catastrophe. That did not happen. But what did happen is that a 650-kilogram warhead detonated within 200 meters of an operational nuclear reactor, and the blast effects, the shrapnel, and the shockwave impacted auxiliary infrastructure that is essential for safe reactor operation. According to the leaked Israeli Atomic Energy Commission assessment, which I referenced in the opening and which has been partially confirmed by reporting in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, the damage includes compromised electrical systems, damaged cooling water intake structures, and destruction of backup generator facilities. The assessment states, and I am paraphrasing here because the full document is classified, that the reactor can continue operating under current conditions, but that redundant safety systems are offline and that repair operations will require at least 3 weeks to restore full operational capability. Think carefully about what this means. Iran did not need to destroy the reactor to achieve a strategic effect. Iran demonstrated that it can hit Dimona. The precision of the strike, landing within 200 meters of the reactor from a range of more than 1,000 kilometers, is a message. The message is that Iranian missiles can reach Israel's most sensitive nuclear facility, that Israeli air defenses cannot reliably intercept them, and that in any future escalation, Dimona is vulnerable. Received. That is announcement number 2. The missile struck auxiliary infrastructure at Dimona, caused significant damage to control and safety systems, and forced Israel to operate its primary nuclear facility with degraded redundancy while repairs are conducted. Now, let's talk about announcement number 3, and this is the part that has governments around the world deeply alarmed. Iran's strike on Dimona was not retaliation for a recent Israeli action. It was a calibrated demonstration of capability designed to establish a new framework of mutual vulnerability. Announcement number 3, the strategic recalibration. For the entire history of the Israeli-Iranian rivalry, the strategic balance has been asymmetric. Israel has nuclear weapons. Iran does not. Israel has the capability to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran, until now, has not demonstrated the capability to strike Israeli nuclear facilities. That asymmetry has shaped every dimension of the conflict. It has given Israel escalation dominance. It has allowed Israel to conduct airstrikes in Syria, assassinations in Iran, and sabotage operations against Iranian nuclear infrastructure with the understanding that Iran's retaliation options are limited. The strike on Dimona changes that calculation. Iran has now demonstrated that it can hold Israel's nuclear infrastructure at risk using conventional precision missiles. Iran does not need nuclear weapons to deter Israeli nuclear threats. Iran needs accurate missiles capable of hitting Dimona, and Iran has now proven it possesses those missiles. This creates what strategists call mutual vulnerability. Israel can threaten Iranian nuclear sites. Iran can now threaten Israeli nuclear sites. Neither side has a clear advantage in a strike-counter-strike scenario, and this is where the analysis intersects with statements that have emerged from senior Iranian officials over the past 48 hours. On April 18th, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian gave an interview to Al Jazeera in which he stated, and I am quoting him directly, "Iran's response was measured and precise. We targeted what needed to be targeted. The message has been delivered. We hope it is understood." That language is deliberately ambiguous, but the subtext is clear. Iran is signaling that it struck Dimona intentionally, that it has the capability to do so again, and that Israel should reconsider its escalation calculus. On April 19th, Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, issued a written statement in which he praised the precision and effectiveness of Iranian missile forces and stated that Iran has crossed thresholds that were previously thought impassable. That language is even more explicit. Khamenei is acknowledging that Iran has breached a strategic barrier, and he is framing it as a deterrent achievement rather than an act of war. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the diplomatic language and the carefully calibrated public statements, because the reality is that multiple governments are currently working to prevent this situation from escalating into an exchange that could have catastrophic consequences. Within hours of the Dimona strike, the United States activated crisis communication protocols with both Israel and Iran. According to reporting by the Wall Street Journal, Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz at 7:15 a.m. on April 17th and urged restraint and emphasized that any Israeli retaliation should be calibrated to avoid further escalation. At 9:40 a.m., Blinken spoke with Iranian Foreign Minister Amir Abdollahian and received assurances that Iran considers the Dimona strike to be a proportional response to previous Israeli actions and that Iran does not intend further attacks unless Israel retaliates. On April 18th, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. The Russian representative stated that all parties must exercise maximum restraint. The Chinese representative called for dialogue and de-escalation. The French representative proposed an immediate 72-hour freeze on all military operations to allow diplomatic efforts to proceed. The United States did not call for condemnation of Iran, which is significant. Instead, the U.S. representative called for both sides to step back and emphasize the need for stability. What this diplomatic activity reveals is that the international community, including the United States, is treating the Dimona strike not as an act of war that requires immediate and overwhelming response, but as a dangerous escalation that must be contained through negotiation and pressure on both sides. That posture reflects the reality that no government, including Israel's closest allies, wants to see this situation spiral into a direct military confrontation between Israel and Iran, especially one that involves threats to nuclear facilities. This pattern has a historical parallel that is impossible to ignore. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a nuclear arms race that was predicated on the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. Both sides had the capability to annihilate the other. Neither side could launch a first strike without guaranteeing its own destruction in retaliation. That mutual vulnerability created strategic stability, not because either side wanted peace, but because both sides understood that war would be suicidal. What we are witnessing in the Middle East right now is the emergence of a similar dynamic, but with a critical difference. Israel has nuclear weapons. Iran does not. But Iran has demonstrated the capability to strike Israel's nuclear infrastructure with conventional weapons. If Israel uses nuclear weapons against Iran, Iran can retaliate by destroying Dimona, which would cripple Israel's ability to sustain its nuclear deterrent and would cause radiological contamination across the region. If Iran develops nuclear weapons, Israel would face an existential threat. Both sides are locked in a strategic dilemma where escalation leads to catastrophic outcomes for both parties. So where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths, because the decisions made in Jerusalem, in Tehran, and in Washington over the next 72 hours will determine whether this crisis stabilizes or explodes. Path 1: Israeli retaliation targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. Israel concludes that the Dimona strike cannot go unanswered and launches airstrikes against Iran's uranium enrichment facilities at Natanz and Fordow. This would be a massive escalation. It would likely trigger sustained Iranian missile attacks against Israeli cities and military installations. It would draw the United States into the conflict either to support Israel or to mediate ceasefire. It would destabilize global energy markets as oil prices spike on fears of Gulf instability. If this path is chosen, we will see emergency security cabinet meetings, mobilization of Israeli reserves, and urgent diplomatic efforts by the U.S. to either support or restrain Israel. Path 2: Negotiated freeze brokered by the United States. The U.S. uses its leverage with both Israel and Iran to establish an immediate halt to all military operations. Israel agrees not to retaliate for the Dimona strike. Iran agrees not to conduct further attacks. Both sides enter indirect negotiations mediated by the U.S. or another third party to establish a framework for de-escalation and mutual restraint. This would represent a strategic stalemate, but it would prevent further immediate escalation. If this path is chosen, we will see high-level diplomatic travel, probably Secretary Blinken visiting the region, and carefully worded statements from both Israel and Iran signaling willingness to de-escalate without admitting weakness. Path 3: Covert Israeli response below the threshold of open warfare. Israel does not launch overt military strikes, but instead conducts covert operations targeting Iranian interests. This could include sabotage, assassinations, or cyber attacks. Iran responds in kind. Both sides engage in a shadow war that remains below the threshold of full-scale military confrontation but continues to impose costs on each other. If this path is chosen, we will see unexplained incidents, plausible deniability from both governments, and a long-term pattern of escalation and counter-escalation without formal declarations or open combat. I think we are moving toward Path 2 with elements of Path 3. The United States has no interest in a Middle East war that disrupts global energy supplies and distracts from strategic competition with China. Israel understands that an open war with Iran would be extraordinarily costly and uncertain. Iran has achieved its objective of demonstrating capability and does not need to press further unless provoked. All three governments have incentives to step back, establish a freeze, and then manage the rivalry through covert means and diplomatic pressure rather than open combat. But here is what you need to watch, because the situation remains volatile and any miscalculation could trigger the escalation that everyone is trying to avoid. Watch Israeli domestic politics. Netanyahu is under enormous pressure from right-wing coalition partners to demonstrate strength. If he faces a no-confidence vote, he may calculate that military action is politically necessary. Watch Iranian statements. If hardliners in Tehran push for continued attacks, or if Khamenei signals that Iran is prepared for prolonged confrontation, that will make de-escalation more difficult. Watch U.S. diplomatic activity. If Blinken travels to Israel, or if there are high-level consultations at the UN, that signals crisis management is underway. Here are the questions I want you to take away from this analysis. Can Israel tolerate a situation where its most sensitive nuclear facility is demonstrably vulnerable to Iranian missile attack? Can Iran afford to press this advantage without risking Israeli retaliation that could set back its nuclear program by years? And can the United States manage this crisis without being drawn into another Middle Eastern conflict? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me if you believe Israel will retaliate or if diplomatic pressure will force restraint. Tell me what sources you are following to track this developing crisis. We will keep monitoring every development in this situation. That is what the Daily Brief does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone trying to understand why the Dimona strike is being treated as a strategic inflection point and not just another escalation. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update. And we will see you in the next briefing.